Good evening, everyone. We at Lecture Series are extremely glad to welcome Honorable Ms. Justice Mukta Gupta, ma'am, our esteemed speaker. Welcome, ma'am. We also welcome the faculty and students of our co-organizer in the event. Delhi University, the PIC of Law College 2 has not been able to join today due to some administrative exigency. We feel our platform stands greatly enhanced with the collaboration of prestigious center as Law College 2 and Delhi University. We also welcome the members of the bar, especially our seniors who have locked into the show. Besides the Delhi University, students from various other institutions have logged in. We hope the members as well as young students find our knowledge serious worthwhile. We welcome all of our young students and colleagues from the legal fraternity. We are also happy to announce several education institutions have agreed to be partner with lecture series for different events, and some wish to join hands permanently. Our seniors from legal fraternity have been a pillar of support, and never before has the legal community witnessed such a surge of knowledge sharing. We are extremely grateful to ma'am and to them. Kadambari, my colleague, will now say a few words about esteemed speaker and the topic for the session. We will have question answer session for the audience at the end of the webinar. Over to you, Kadambari.
Thanks so much, Rubinder, and good evening, everyone. We are extremely privileged to be honored with the presence of our very, very esteemed and eminent speaker, Honorable Ms. Justice Mukta Gupta. I welcome you again, ma'am.
Thank you.
Justice Mukta Gupta needs no introduction. She is reckoned as an authority, especially in the domain of criminal laws. Two words that come to our mind in the legal fraternity reference are bold and equitable. And the most hardened criminals and the most aggressive lawyers feel a sense of trepidation when appearing before her, especially while a wrongdoer. Her judgments have a quality of being very precise, with clarity of law and facts. That does not through rolls and rolls of paper to understand the issue and the legal position. For the benefit of the audience, I would like to give a brief background of ma'am prior and after her elevation. Prior to her elevation, Justice Mukta Gupta was appointed as the additional public prosecutor in the Delhi High Court and thereafter as the standing counsel on the criminal side for the government of NCT of Delhi. She was also appointed as a special CBI counsel in many cases during this time. As a CBI counsel, she represented the agency in important matters, which included Naval War Room leak case, Priya Darshani Mattu murder case, Madhumita Sharma murder case. And as a Delhi government counsel, she appeared in many other criminal cases, including Parliament and Red Fort shootout cases, Jessica Lal murder case, Naina Sahni murder case, Nitish Katara murder case in the High Court and the Supreme Court. Justice Mukta Gupta was appointed as the additional judge of the Delhi High Court on 23rd October 2009 and became the permanent judge on 29th May 2014. After her elevation, Justice Gupta has delivered several landmark judgments. Her intense judgment on refusal to grant a reduction of sentence in a case of minor's rape on the grounds of consent of a minor was widely appreciated. She has openly deprecated the antisocial behavior in sexual harassment and rape cases, wherein the accused tries to settle the matter by offer of marriage or some other sort of settlement to avoid the grave repercussions after the crime has been committed. Some of her much publicized orders and judgments relate to Asthana bribery case, rejection of bail in VVIP chopper scam, post-demonetization money laundering bail case, Fortis promoters bail case. Justice Gupta has also headed the UAPA tribunal, which upheld the 5-year extension of ban on Students Islamic Movement of India, which is SIMI. On the civil side, one particular landmark judgment that I wish to mention relates to a civil suit, which is pertaining to passing off, wherein Justice Gupta held that if a business, though established in UAE, if operating in India and accessible in India through Amazon.in, then it can be said that the business was being carried on in Delhi for profit. In this case, she held that there was a specific intent to mislead the public by the company. Another case on the civil side, which is a landmark ruling. In fact, another similar judgment has come today only by the Supreme Court on the same point, which is the alter ego of a company. So this was the GMR case where she rendered the judgment about for the permitting arbitral tribunal to decide the issue of alter ego, which is allowing the tribunal to lift the corporate veil. Justice Mukta Gupta has very kindly agreed to share with us her repertoire of vast knowledge and understanding of the law, which she has gathered both when she was a lawyer as well as now on the bench. The clarity on the topic, on this specific topic that we are having today, has been quite lawyers. Many times cases are lost. Misunderstanding or lack of... Can you please mute? Thank you. So as I was saying, that many cases are lost only because the case has not been sufficiently proved with reference to the electronic evidence. While we lawyers may reconcile with a lost case, but it plays havoc with the common litigants. And given the checkered history on the interpretation of this particular statute of 65B on admissibility and the other provisions of the Indian Evidence Act, this session, we hope, will provide the clarity of understanding on the admissibility and the proof required in case of electronic evidence. In this session, Justice Mukta Gupta talk about various aspects of electronic evidence, how to prove it, the issues of relevance, admissibility of primary or secondary evidence, besides various other facets. We once again welcome you, ma'am, and really look forward to your session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kadambari. Thank you, Rubinder. Good evening to everybody. So, let's now start with the topic of the day. Now, with the exponential growth in e-commerce and public-private sector using e-governance, virtually today every trial has an element of electronic evidence, whether it be civil or criminal. Even a trial which has nothing to do with cyber crimes, there are elements which need parties to tender evidence, which is electronic evidence. We all feel that electronic evidence is a big issue and very difficult to sort out, but let's go to the basics, and we find that electronic evidence is also a species of evidence, and the three fundamental principles governing appreciation of evidence apply to this electronic evidence as well, that is relevancy, admissibility, and reliability. And if we keep in mind that these three factors, we'll never be faulting in adducing proper evidence. Even before the Information Technology Act came and there were amendments brought to the Evidence Act, foundation as to how electronic evidence has to be was laid down by the Supreme Court in regard to the tape-recorded conversations. First one being R.M. Malkani versus State of Maharashtra, where the Supreme Court said that the three principles which make the recorded conversation admissible would be that it is relevant to the matters in issue, secondly, identification of the voice, and thirdly, accuracy of the tape-recorded conversation has to be proved by eliminating the possibility of erasing the tape record. So the tests were relevancy, admissibility, and reliability. Now, this was carried forward in Ram Singh versus Colonel Ram Singh, when Supreme Court, considering all earlier decisions, elaborated it and held that a tape-recorded conversation, tape-recorded statement would be admissible if the voice of the speaker must be duly identified by the maker of the record or by other. Is the first requirement of admissibility. Then the accuracy of the tape-recorded statement by satisfactory evidence, either direct or indirect. Every possibility of tampering has to be ruled out, and the statement must be relevant according to the Rules of Evidence Act. Fifthly, the recorded cassette must be carefully sealed and kept in safe custody, and the voice of the speaker should be clearly audible. Now, based on the UNCITRAL model, the Information Technology Act was enacted and amendments were brought to the Indian Evidence Act. However, if you see the entire gamut of the Information Technology Act or the amendments brought, again, they deal with the basic requirements of relevancy, admissibility, and reliability. And let me caution, what happens is most of the people confuse these three issues and jumble them up, not realizing all three are in a different compartment. A document, electronic document, or evidence may be relevant, but still not admissible, may be admissible, still not relevant, and even if both relevant and admissible may not be relied upon by the court for various reasons. So each aspect has to be linked in. So first of all, what is the relevancy of an admissible evidence, of electronic evidence? Say, for example, a CCTV footage of a place of occurrence, that would be certainly relevant. Mobile phone call records showing the place where the position of the person is, the witnesses or the accused is, then whether the parties interacted or soon before an offense was committed or an act, there was an interaction between the parties. So all these will be relevant. And all the principles of section 5 to 16 of the Indian Evidence Act, which deal with relevancy of a fact in issue and the facts related thereto, would be applicable to an evidence, electronic evidence as well. Now, to understand what would be an admissible evidence, second aspect, admissible evidence, one must understand what is a primary and secondary electronic evidence. Because if we are not able to distinguish between the primary and the secondary electronic evidence, we will not be able to understand whether a certificate under section 60B is required or not. The fundamental principle is that for the primary evidence, no certificate under section 65B is required, of the Indian Evidence Act is required. Only if you lead a secondary evidence, then a certificate under section 65B is required. Now, what is the primary evidence? Supposing you have something regarding in a laptop, you just give the laptop itself in evidence, that's a primary evidence. However, if a document is taken or generated from that laptop, it will be a secondary evidence. Now, if there is a message recorded on a telephone, mobile phone, the mobile phone itself is seized, it's a primary evidence. You don't need a certificate under section 65B. But if it is recorded and thereafter a transcript taken thereof, then it would be primary evidence. Now, to understand what is a primary and a secondary evidence, even in electronic evidence, we'll have to go back to section 62 of the Indian Evidence Act, which provides the definition of primary evidence, and which is an inclusive definition to say that, which means that the document itself produced for the inspection of the court And when it says when the document itself is produced, if a document is executed in several parts, each part will be a primary evidence. And if it is executed in counterparts, then each counterpart will be a primary evidence against the party executing it. Now, the second explanation to it is where a number of documents are all made by one uniform process, so each will be a original copy. But from the original, if number of copies are thereafter made, then they will not be, they will be secondary evidence. Now the same principle applies when it says that when there is when in the system there are number of computers and a document is generated on all the computers together, it would be a primary evidence. It will not, if there are number of these printouts from these computers, they will be secondary evidence. Now similarly, explains what is secondary evidence. Certified copies, original by mechanical process, which ensure the accuracy. Counterparts of documents against the party not execute them. Then oral contents of the document, which by a person who has seen the document himself. Now, so we apply the same principle to the electronic evidence, and we find that a computer, a laptop, a hard drive, or a mobile phone with its memory card, DVR or the CCTV, they are all primary evidence. So you would have seen that most of the time when the recovery is made, to get out the rigors of section 65B, what they do is they just seize the mobile phone itself and put it before the court. Of course, they get the forensic analysis also done, but since that is a primary evidence itself, they don't need any further certification there. Now, however, in a given case, generally speaking, a CD, DVD, pen drive will be a secondary evidence. However, if the document is generated or recorded on that said CD and DVD or the memory chip, then it will be a primary evidence. So the test is that the original media should be stored or recorded directly in the said electronic device by a self-generated or automated mechanism created without any human intervention. Now, the problem is when we deal with electronic evidence, most the data related primary evidence is stored in virtual Google Drive, so they cannot be presented to the court. For this very reason, the computer printouts or a document stored, recorded or copied in optical media produced by a computer has to be taken out, and that is why that needs a certificate under section 65B. Now, what happens? Let's take for example a mobile phone. If a message is recorded, message received is, or a video received therein is recorded therein, you can just tender that in the evidence. But the practical difficulty is then that you don't have the mobile phone thereafter. Similarly, you today find that for most of the investigations, CCTV footages are collected. Now what do they do is they take away the DVR, which is the hard drive of, and then on the taking out the, on getting it forensically analyzed, file it in the court. So they have the primary evidence and they have a forensic expert's opinion indicating the evidence which is sought to be adduced. Let us say, for example, a scanned copy, whether it is admissible in evidence or not. Generally speaking, a scanned copy of a document will not be admissible in court, in evidence, for the reason scanned copy from the original. And when you have the original, which is a primary evidence, you are required to prove the same. You can't then fall back on the scanned copy. But in a given case where the scanned copy is from an original which has been destroyed, which has been lost, proved that the primary evidence does not exist, then the scanned copy can be produced as a secondary evidence, but cogent evidence will have to be led to show that this scanned copy is exactly as the original and there is no tampering there. Now, Supreme Court in this Union of India and others versus Sandeep Kumar and copy merely because the original was not available as admissible. Now we come to the admissibility of the primary electronic evidence and secondary electronic evidence. As I said, in the first instance, for the primary electronic evidence, one does not need any certificate under Section 65B. However, a certificate under Section 65B is required if you are leading secondary evidence, electronic evidence. Now, there has been a lot of issues on this, and let me at the outset clarify that in Anwar PB versus PK Bashir, Supreme Court said that that is mandatory and overruled Navjot Sandhu's judgment. In fact, in Navjot Sandhu's judgment, Supreme Court, High Court and Supreme Court held that the requirement of Section 65B is required to be complied with, but at that stage they said that because though the certificate was not given, as a document was not given, but when the witness came in the witness box, he deposed about all the requirements of Section 65B, and on that basis the electronic evidence was held to be admissible. However, in Anwar PV, Supreme Court said no, it has to be a certificate given under section as prescribed under 65B, which has to be given. And after Anwar PV, what happened, most of the courts, because the certificate was not issued at the time when the document was generated, started passing acquittal orders or rejecting those electronic evidence. However, if you read Anwar PV versus PK Bashir, it those said that this certificate should be at the time when the document should be generated, but they clarified that, also clarified that this certificate has to be tendered in evidence at the time when the evidence is being led. This situation was clarified by the Delhi High Court in the decision of Kundan Singh versus State, and said that Anwar PV never said that the certificate cannot be tendered at the stage of evidence, which continues to be the law. However, as regards the mandatory requirement of certificate under Section 65B, a clarification has further been issued by the Supreme Court in Shafi Muhammad's case. In a case where the party is not in possession of the document generated from that computer output, there can be no insistence of a certificate under Section 65B from that party. For example, during the course of investigation, the prosecution is able to take statements of accounts from the accused. Now, the computer is not in possession of the investigating agency, so it has no means to give that 65B certificate. Similarly, when you're relying upon a document which is in possession of the other party and you have a computer printout thereof, there can be no insistence on giving a certificate other party. Now, there is yet another principle before I come to the provisions of 5A and B. The primary evidence is inadmissible. The secondary evidence is held admissible with the aid of certificate under Section 65B. Let us take, for example, a statement under section 161 CRPC. It is not a substantive evidence and not admissible in evidence. It can be used for a limited purpose. Hence, even a secondary electronic evidence of that statement cannot be held to be admissible. Yet another example is a confessional statement made before the police. By section 25 and inadmissible, the statement, even if video recorded, cannot be used in evidence. So now let's come to section 65A and 65B, which 65A says that the contents of electronic to section 65B. Now 65B has 4 subsections, and out of that the most important part is 65B1 states that any information contained in any electronic record which is printed on a paper or stored in a medium which is generally called a computer output has to be proved in as per the conditions laid down further. Now subsection 2 lays down 4 requirements, and instead of the section, if one reads, that is very nicely elucidated in the decision in para 12 of the decision in Anwar P.V. Bashir. And I'll just read those 4 requirements of section 65. Record containing the information should have been produced by the computer during the period over which the same was regularly used to store or process information for the purpose of any activity regularly carried out and by the person having lawful control over the use of that computer. So that's the first requirement. Second is the information of the kind contained in the electronic record was regularly fed into the computer in the ordinary course of activity. Then the third requirement is that during the material part, the computer was operating properly, and even if it was not operating properly for the entire time, there were some breaks, the accuracy of the contents is maintained, and at the relevant time, it was operating properly. Then the information contained in the record should be reproduction or derivation from the information fed into the computer in the ordinary course of the said activity. Now, section 65B4 then prescribes 3. I'm skipping because it only defines that when it is a computer, the combinations of computer will also be the same than different computers. We can come straight away to 65B4, which says, in any proceedings where it is desired to give a statement in evidence by virtue of this section, a certificate with the following 5 requirements of the certificate are that the certificate must describe the manner in which the electronic record was produced. The certificate must furnish the particulars of the device involved in the production of the record. The certificate must deal with the applicable conditions mentioned above, that is the conditions of 65B2. Then the certificate must be signed by a person occupying a responsible official position in relation to the operation of the relevant device. So these are the requirements whereby if these are satisfied, the electronic evidence, the secondary electronic evidence becomes admissible in law. So however, when we say that it becomes in law, we must further realize that section, now if you see the incorporations in section 65B, it is to incorporate, this has been incorporated to ensure authenticity, integrity, and non-repudiation of the document. And all this certificate ensures is that by the party which is asserting the certificate, there is non-repudiation of the document. However, the other party is at liberty to repudiate and show that the document is either inadmissible or it is not, there is some tampering therein, which issues I'll come to later. Now, there are certain documents which are per se admissible, like a report under section 65B. Now, they would not need any formal proof. So the witness need not come in appearance in the court for that document. For a document to be admissible, it has to be also proved in accordance with law. And a document which is inadmissible in law, even if you try to prove it, it will not become admissible. In Supreme Court in Sonu versus State of Haryana clarified this position and said that the objections to the admissibility of a document can be classified into two categories. The first is a per se inadmissible document. So no amount of proof can make those documents admissible. And even for an objection in respect of a per se and inadmissible document can be taken even at the stage of appeal. It is not necessary that it is taken at the trial court. However, if a document is admissible and at the stage of admission of the document during the course of trial, an objection as to the mode of proof is not taken, then that cannot be taken at the stage of appeal because it has to be taken in the first instance. Now, this is in nutshell with regard to the admissibility of primary and secondary evidence. Now I'll come to the third aspect, that's the reliability of electronic evidence. Mere admission of a secondary evidence or even primary evidence does not amount to the proof of its contents. The genuineness, the correctness, and the existence of the document has to be proved independently by the party asserting it, having placed the record on record the admissible document during trial. So, in case the court finds that though relevant and admissible, the document is not reliable because there appears to be some tampering therein, or the chain of custody has not been proved. Like in a case of a mobile phone is seized, but thereafter there is access to the mobile phone so that it can't be ruled out that the messages therein have been changed and all. The court may discard that evidence. Let us take, for example, a laptop seized during the course of investigation. And it's a very common example which happens that after the seizure, they will say that it has been seized, sealed, but then they analyze it forensically by accessing the laptop. Now that laptop, you get imprints therein, you get to know that it's accessed, and with the result, the integrity of that evidence is lost, resulting in discarding that evidence. So how does one work on these evidences to find out that the integrity of this evidence is not lost, and at the same time, the forensic analysis or the information stored therein is received so that you actually know whether it is against the party asserting it or in its favor. So the way out there is that you have to take a mirror image of these electronic devices and without accessing the device, take a mirror image thereon, and on the basis of that mirror image, the forensic analysis can be done. Now, so the to prove the acquisition and preservation of electronic evidence so that it is reliable, the party has to prove, number one, the physical control on that document, that electronic document, because unlike a physical document, an electronic document can be very easily tampered by just a click of a button. Then you can collect volatile, non-volatile evidence. Then you have to create a digital fingerprint. So you have to find out the hash value. The hash value at the time of seizure, at the time of mirror image, and after examination of the mirror image should change. So a change in the hash value would, I mean, even a change of a dot in the hash value, say, for example, I write my name as Mukta Gupta dot, instead of I say Mukta dot Gupta. So the hash value will change. So that will show that there is a manipulation in the electronic record. So this is one of the very important methods to find out. Then, as I said, you have to create forensic duplication of original data, which is create a mirror image or shift from hard drive to hard drive without access. And by creating a clone, you can do it. Then, besides all that, you have to also prove the chain of custody, like if it's a laptop, in whose custody it remained at which stage and who had the custody thereof. Like any other link evidence, this has all to be preserved. Then metadata is also required to be preserved. So say for example, it's an email. Now if you give the email without the headers, it is completely inadmissible because you don't get from where it originated to whom it has gone. And though that is not a genuineness to prove that the person whose name is given as sent it, but yes, from so and so address it originated and came to this address can be verified. Then we must understand one more fundamental principle. In every trial, there is a shifting of onus. Though it is said in a criminal trial, it has to be proof beyond reasonable doubt, and in a civil trial, by preponderance of probability, but that is for the entire bundle of facts that have been proved. Now, when a particular fact is being proved, say for example, let's take for a message received, WhatsApp message received on the mobile phone. The witness says that I received so-and-so message, here is my telephone. This telephone was sealed on that day, and there is no tampering with it, and that is adduced in evidence. So that party has discharged its onus. However, the other side, the onus then shifts on the other side to disprove the fact that this evidence is either reliable or admissible or on any of the count, either by disproving the chain of custody or by disproving that it is not the original record, in whatever manner that's available as per the facts of the case. Now, as I said, how do we prove the emails? You do it by a computer printout or in an electronic form in a CD/pen drive. Then you have to give the header. Then certificate under section 65B of the Indian Evidence Act has to be furnished. Now, original document as far as possible should be preserved unless one is exempted as per the provisions of the IT Act, such as section 7, which says that the data is required to be retained till the time it is prescribed. So if it is not retained beyond that, or it's a computer generated program where it is overwritten like a CCTV, some of them just overwrite after 15 days. So it cannot be retained. In that case, the non-production of original will not hamper the trial, will not be adverse to the party. So some of the salient features of the IT Act in this regard, which is relevant to the electronic evidences: section 4, legal recognition of electronic record. Then section 7, legal recognition of retained data. Then section 11, attribution of electronic data. Section 12, acknowledgement of receipt. Section 13, time and place of dispatch and receipt of electronic evidence. Then we come to the presumption aspect, which is again available even for electronic evidence. Section 88 of the, section 88 of the 88A, B and C of the Indian Evidence Act provide for presumption in this regard. 88A relates to presumption as to electronic evidence. B relates to electronic records and electronic signatures. And C relates to electronic signature certificate. So the court may presume that an electronic message forwarded by the originator through an electronic mail server to the addressee to whom the message purports to be addressed corresponds with the message as fed into the computer for transmission, but the court shall not presume as to the person by whom such message has been sent. So you may have a presumption as to the original, receipt, and the contents of the message, but not the person who sent the message, because it could be any person, unless it is identified and correlated with the originator. So while leading an electronic evidence, you need to pose 6 fundamental questions to yourself in regard to the document which you are going to exhibit. What is the document sought to be proved? When was the document prepared? Who prepared the document? What was the purpose of preparing the document? Who received the document? Where the receiver received the document? That is what, when, who, what, who, where. And you will be, if you complete this chain and along with the certificate under section 65B, your electronic evidence will prima facie satisfy all the tests and you would have led it properly. So these are the fundamental tests: relevancy, admissibility, reliability, and then what, when, who, where, etc. So as long as you comply with these requirements, I don't think that there should be any difficulty in anybody leading electronic evidence, because it's a part of our everyday routine today. Every matter requires electronic evidence. Thank you very much. With this, I just wanted to give an overview of what the electronic evidence and its basics are there. And I want to leave some time for the question answers also, so that we can further interact. Kadambari, you are on mute.
I'm unmuted. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the very, very insightful and clarifying so many misunderstandings at one hand. Ma'am, I just wanted to also clarify, get a clarification on, I believe after this P. Anwar, again, there has been a deliberation on this, the same issue of admissibility of 65B.
Yes.
And, could you?
So I'll just say again, P.V. Anwar said, certificate is mandatory, unlike held in Navjot Sandhu, where said, even if no certificate is there, requirements of certificate are met because that witness who was maintaining that record came into the witness box and deposed about those requirements. In P.V. Anwar, Supreme Court said, no, there has to be a document in the form of a certificate. It said that document should be generated when the printout is taken. It is absolutely right. And because that is the best time you can take it. Next, at the time when you are leading evidence, you may have that witness you may not have that witness, it may be very difficult for you to prove. However, if you read that judgment properly, it does not say that if it is not tendered at that time, and in fact it says and be tendered at the time of evidence. So it can be tendered at that time. So you may file initially, or even in a given case, you file it later on. It will be admissible because evidence has to be seen admissible at the time when you are tendering the evidence. When you are just filing it, it's no evidence. It is to be, when it is being tendered, it is to be an evidence.
Right.
So this is what is clarified, and there was a lot of confusion. People said because the certificate was not, and many of us judges did, take a decision on the point that since the certificate has not been issued at the time when the computer printout was taken, now it cannot be later on. It is prospectively, it cannot be given. So the entire evidence, electronic evidence, has to be discarded. But that was never the position. So in fact, even if this position has been very nicely elucidated by the Delhi High Court in Kundan Singh's judgment, and I'll request everybody to read it. It clarifies all those facts.
Because a lot of judgments were given by taking a certain interpretation of P. Anwar's case, I believe.
Yes.
A lot of
And then, Shafi Muhammad only further clarified. Shafi Muhammad, it's only an interim order as yet. The matter is still pending before the Supreme Court because they want to lay down the SOPs also in this regard. But they clarified that you can't ask a person to do the impossible. I get a computer printout somewhere. Supposing I take out my bank statement. Tomorrow the bank refuses to give me a certificate. It's their computer printout. It is not my computer printout. My certificate will not work. Their certificate. So the law can never demand something impossible from me. Computer is regularly working. It is the information was fed in the due course, has been with the responsible officer. I can't give that.
And
so you can't ask for impossible.
Yes, and a lot of I think there is a practice to just give those certificates.
Exactly. So it can never be a mindless exercise. It has to be an exercise with application of mind. So yeah, one more thing which I think ICS have already dealt with it. That once, in a given case, whether ordinarily, if you receive a printout, it is a secondary evidence which would need a certificate under 65B. But if I just have a scanned copy, I have scanned it on my mobile phone. For me, that will become a primary evidence if I hand over the mobile phone itself. So you have to analyze it vis-a-vis the person giving that evidence.
Right. Right.
So if I come into possession, not as a document computer printout, suppose there is an agreement to sell, let's take it, between two parties, the other party keeps the original and does not hand me over the second or the copy counter signed by both the parties. In that case, and what is kept with you is that on your you just scanned it on a computer, this mobile phone, which everybody today clicks.
Right.
That's the first thing everybody does. Now that's a scanned copy. Vis-a-vis the other party, that scanned copy is not admissible in evidence. But vis-a-vis me, this is admissible in evidence, no? Because this is the only evidence I have with me. And I will say how I got it. This is the original, or I have produced it from my computer, from my mobile phone through this computer, and this is that output. And I will give my 65B certificate vis-a-vis that computer output from my mobile phone.
Surely.
Not the original one. Having discharged this onus, the onus will then shift to the other party to prove the original. So because I have done my part.
Understood.
You must understand, law never asks us to do something which is unreasonable and cannot and impossible. It is always logical, and go by the first principles and logic, there'll be never any. So
Well
my
said.
endeavor today was to fit in everything by the first principle.
Thank you so much, ma'am. And I think Rubinder, can you hear us? Are you on the mute? Rubinder had certain questions, and there are some questions put up on the chat also, ma'am.
Ma'am,
Rubinder,
thank you. Hello. Ma'am, thank you so much, ma'am, for an extremely insightful and knowledgeable session. I'm sure the concepts of all the attendees have been clarified on the subject, which is seen as quite complex by many. Webinar or who wish to rehear the webinar will have the benefit of hearing the recorded version of ma'am's lecture. Ma'am, before I thank you, ma'am, it's really, ma'am, when we started law, it was said that Evidence Act is the Gita of criminal law. And ma'am, the way you have dealt with the subject today, so practically, and it's been so intense and profound, ma'am, that the very concepts of not only Evidence Act, but not only Electronic Act, ma'am, but the Evidence Act has also become very clear. The way, ma'am, you cited the judgments of Sonu versus State versus Haryana, ma'am, this is remarkable, ma'am. Then coming on to Anwar's case, Tandu's case, and ma'am, admissibility of secondary or primary evidence, and then you focused on proof of admissibility of a document vis-a-vis, ma'am, tampering and safety of data, ma'am. Ma'am, then again, ma'am, coming to shifting of owners to disprove the fact relating to data, ma'am, Section 7 of IT Act, ma'am, non-production of originals, ma'am. And ma'am, what was very insightful was, ma'am, Section 4, Section 7, Section 11, Section 12, Section 13 of the IT Act. Ma'am, then you very elaboratedly, ma'am, explained of Section 88 A, B, C of Indian Evidence Act. And ma'am, certainly those 6 fundamental questions of what, when, who, why, where, ma'am. These, ma'am, have thrown a glaring, ma'am, impact on the today's topic, ma'am. And we are so much grateful to you, ma'am. And we again request you for a question answers round, ma'am. But now shifting my
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, shifting my focus to Kadambari, ma'am. I just wanted to ask Kadambari a question. I was reading, in fact, I read this case of hers in a newspaper, and I would request Kadambari to kindly throw a light on a judgment in one of your cases where admissibility of a tape recorded conversation in a matrimonial case was an issue. Could I ask you to throw some light on the subject, because it's been a very talking subject, your judgment, Kadambari. Over to you.
Thank you, Rubinder. I'll just take 2 minutes to discuss that judgment. So what happened was, in this particular case, it was a matrimonial matter, and the husband, one of the spouses, had surreptitiously recorded the conversation of his wife with a third party and was seeking divorce on the basis of that. So the main contention which was raised by the counsel for the other side was that it infringed her right to privacy. And those days, just the same time, the Puttu Swamy judgment had come, which was a 9 judges bench, constitutional bench judgment. And this had held right to privacy to be a fundamental right. So the issue was whether the fundamental right of a person is superior to the admissibility of an illegally recorded conversation, because it was a personal conversation. So in this, in fact, the court, and rightly so, went on firstly to Section 14 of the Family Courts Act, which says that the family court can receive any evidence, any kind of document, information for its consideration, whether it is admissible or not admissible under the Family Courts Act. And the Puttu Swamy judgment also, it was pointed out that it did refer to certain two judgments which were pertain to the matrimonial matters, X versus Hospital, and one was Sharda versus Dharampal, whereby in one case there was a medical examination, the person was HIV positive, and this information was sought to be divulged by the doctor to the patient, to the fiancé of this HIV patient. So it was held that it did not go against right to privacy, because there are countervailing fundamental rights of the other parties also. So it is not an absolute right. So therefore, the court will decide on the facts of each case. And in any case, given that the special statute is there, the Family Courts Act, Section 14, which has a right to receive. So this is how this matter was decided, that this particular tape recorded conversation would be admissible. So that is all I wanted to say.
I must say, hats off to you, because you have, very competently, laid down this order and a much talked and highlighted judgment, because yes, you had in your way Puttaswamy's judgment, and you correctly pointed it out that family court can make its own rules for doing justice, and absolutely, and that's the reason why it's in some states, only parties are allowed. But here, yes, in Delhi, hats off to our system that even lawyers are capable lawyers like you are, allowed to come and plead. And thank you so much. Coming over to ma'am for question answers round. Ma'am, may I invite you for some questions which have been put in?
Sure.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, my first question to you is, ma'am, do you agree that since 65B starts with a non-obstante, thereby it gives no scope to secondary evidence, ma'am? What, according to you, would have been the intention of the legislature to start the section with non-obstante, ma'am?
See, it is a special statute as held by the Supreme Court in Anwar PV, and very rightly. And that is why that requirement of 65B, because see, electronic evidence in its form, as I said, it is very easy to tamper with that evidence. So this requirement that it should have all these stringent certificates which says this is the computer, this was working, so that initial onus is discharged by that person that everything was in order. But even if it is not found, that's a further aspect. So, but this initial onus will have to be discharged, and this being the certificate is necessary, but it is not for every document. As I gave the example and as held by Supreme Court in Shafi Mohammed, if the secondary evidence is not from my computer output, like I said, my bank statement given by the bank, I can't give a certificate under Section 65. I can give a certificate under Section 65B for a statement or a computer output which is my computer. So that impossibility cannot be asked to be done. But otherwise, yes, it is a mandatory provision. Even in Navjot Sandhu, it was not held that it is not mandatory. It only said that instead of that certificate in writing, the witness has deposed about this ingredients thereof. So that confirms with the requirement.
Right.
If you see the weight of authorities, they all say it is mandatory.
Right, ma'am. So we can safely say, ma'am, that non-obstante clause overrides other clauses. Then does that mean in absence of certificate, no electronic document should be looked into?
Of course, if it is not tendered at the time of evidence also. So when you are tendering your evidence, if it is without a 65B certificate, then it is inadmissible in evidence. And this being it's a clause of admissibility. It is not a clause of mode of proof.
Right.
If it is said it has to be proved in this manner, then the objection was required to be taken at the stage of trial. But it says that if it is not with this certificate, this evidence will be inadmissible. So if the certificate is not there, it cannot be looked into.
So, ma'am, it
Ma'am,
would be correct
the
in understanding of 65B that by supplying certificate under 65B subclause 4, indirect, ma'am, / secondary document is elevated as primary evidence, and requirement of furnishing primary document is done away with.
See, let me tell you, this misnomer that it gets elevated to a primary evidence is not there. Primary evidence is primary evidence and secondary is secondary evidence. But the fact is, you can receive secondary evidence in the absence of primary evidence.
Vinder, would you also take up the questions which the audience has given? I mean, you can.
Yeah, please. I find some of the questions popping up on the screen.
Yes, ma'am.
May I just interject, my lord? Just one small question. The example of the bank statement which was given by you. Now, there could be two situations. One is that I online print my own bank statement at home. So if I do that, I'll be required to furnish my own 65B because I'm.
And then it's a computer output from your own, that I've clarified. If it is a computer output, even if this is the primary evidence or secondary is with, for you, that is a secondary evidence to the extent that it is a computer output from my own computer, you will have to that extent, you will have to give.
Right.
But if you get a bank statement from the bank and they don't give you the certificate under either the Bankers Book Evidence Act or this, then you can't supplant that
Would it
certificate.
not be, then you will not be able to prove that particular bank statement. Am I correct when I say that?
Of course, yes. And for bank statement, there is a particular provision under the Bankers Book Evidence Act. And that certificate under Section 2A is paramateria similar to Section 65B. In fact, there is a judgment delivered by me which related to the insurance policies issues, and where I discarded now number of bank statements in view of the fact that they were not accompanied by the certificate under Section 2A as required on the Bankers Book Evidence Act.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yes, Kadambari.
Yes, ma'am. Rubinder, there are some questions which have been asked by.
Can I ask it? Can I request Vineet to flash them a bit longer, because in half a second it's not able to,
Okay. Can I ask, or can you see the questions, Rubinder?
I'm not being able to see the questions. Can you please?
I will ask. Just start asking. Ma'am, there are some questions. I will start taking up one by one. Jayant is asking about certified, this has already been answered to Jayant, but I will just repeat the question. Who certifies secondary evidence printout from mails and how it is done? Ma'am, would you like to?
So the mail, if you are receiving the mail and you are exhibiting it, you will say that I received so-and-so mail. This is the origin, this is the header with the mail with the header, and it's a computer printout of which generated from my computer. So whosoever is exhibiting the mail, either you give the telephone directly to as primary evidence in the court, or otherwise if you are using the computer printout, the person who is doing it.
Ma'am, that is a confusion amongst lawyers, that if you give 65B, then that suffices. But
no, they feel that 65B is a brahmastra. You once you've done with 65B, no further requirement is there. I would say 65B is a threshold where you have discharged the initial onus, that your document enters into the channel of an admissible document. Then the further issues which it has to clear, the passages it has to clear, will still remain.
Right, ma'am.
Chain of custody, then the other side may attack your document as this is tampered with, it's not reliable. So all those issues will be there. You just, with the 65B certificate, you only discharge the initial threshold.
Ma'am, there's another, thank you, ma'am. And there's another question. Is there a procedure / test by which the investigating agency can procure mobile phones computers as in the USA. In the USA, the investigating agency can only request access to specific evidence and not the entire device. Ma'am, we are not able to hear.
Yeah, it got unmuted.
Yes.
No, see, actually, if there is some message received, let's see in a case of an obscene message received on as an SMS or as a video on a mobile phone, that mobile phone itself will be a primary evidence. Okay. That will have to be sent to forensic analysis. Now they'll take a mirror image, work on that. Now that mirror image can always be the secondary evidence on which it is worked. But what happens is, to be doubly sure that they are not going wrong, the investigating agency collects those mobile phones. This is the first thing because this is the easiest. Now in India, investigation is not defined in the sense what is investigation. Whatever is relevant, whatever is the requirement to prove or disprove a fact can be looked into in investigation. So this being a material evidence, there is no law that you can't do it. It's a matter of guidelines. In fact, in one of the judgments in Delhi High Court I delivered, I said, what happens is you want to see that this person was at that relevant point available at a particular place, and it is a CCTV footage from a local nearby adjoining shop. So what they used to take, they used to just take away CCTV footage. A poor man would say, why for a third party for a dacoit running, why should I lose out on my CCTV footage and CCTV, and every time I have to then install it again. He said, I'd better not do it. So then I passed the directions that you will not take the entire CCTV footage because the DVR is DVR itself is the main component thereof, your primary evidence. Take the DVR, but replace the DVR because it is your duty to collect the investigating officer, but not the duty of that shopkeeper. So if you are taking that phone DVR, you must replace it.
Thank you so much, ma'am. This question was actually from Riya Yadav. I had not mentioned her name. Now, our next question is from Priyanka Midha. Are electronic signatures admissible? Can the documents with electronic signatures be enforced in the court of law?
Yes, electronic and digital signatures are admissible. And as I read, there is under section 85B IT Act, there is presumption as to electronic records and electronic signatures. But then this is just a presumption, which is a rebuttable presumption, which can be rebutted, stating that these are not my digital signatures, these are tampered with.
And then the entire process of...
entire process. See, we just forget to understand that basic principle. In every trial, the onus keeps shifting. It's a never static formula. After having discharged the initial burden, then it shifts to the other side. Then other side proves it, disproves that fact. So say you proved it, it disproves the fact. So you may have to again prove by some additional evidence.
Like in rebuttal evidence.
In rebuttal, yes.
That is the relevance. Thank you, ma'am.
There's a question from Abhishek, ma'am. If an agreement is executed in presence of a witness, the statement of witness contradicts the handwriting expert's report regarding signature of an executor. Does one statement hold higher evidentiary value over the others in this case, ma'am? How does the situation change if the agreement was executed in a digital signature? And what is the role of certificate authority in such cases?
See, this question is in the realm of appreciation of evidence as to whether the court should rely on the testimony of the witness or on the handwriting expert. Let us be very clear, handwriting expert science is not an exact science as the fingerprint science is. So there can be errors. Equally, the witness can also be stating falsehood, may not be a truthful witness. So the court will have to weigh all the pros and cons and see whether that expert opinion is more reliable or this witness is more reliable based on the attending circumstances. There can never be a hard and fast straight jacket formula for this.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Kadimri, hello, Kadimri, with your permission and with your lordship's permission, may I ask one question, please?
Please.
Lordship, this certificate of 65B, it necessarily has to be in the form of affidavit, or it can be a general certificate?
See, when you give a certificate, it is, you are virtually deposing as to that fact. So mere self-certification does not serve the purpose, because whatsoever you have said in certificate, tomorrow if it is found to be false, action can be taken against you for that purpose.
Right, ma'am.
So it has the sanctity of an affidavit.
So, Lordship, there is a connected question. Generally, there are statutory bodies which file complaints.
Right.
Like in those cases, generally the registrar or the person in charge files a complaint, criminal cases. Now,
Right.
generally the office computer, they take out the printouts and the certificate is to be given of the registrar, the head of the department, or the person who is in control of the computer.
See, that's why I read 65 B2. What did it say? It is the person who is responsible and who is dealing with that computer in the day-to-day course of functioning, in the ordinary course of functioning, who
Right.
fed the data, under whose control that computer is.
Right.
So ordinarily that person will be the right person. Now supposing you give a certificate of, say, an officer, say from the, in a company, you give a certificate, say from the sales. Now when the certificate comes, the other side will put questions to that witness. He says, okay, when was the data fed in the computer? Who generates it? How do you know it? He will say, I don't know anything. So that 65B certificate will be useless.
So, Lordship, that person will come into the witness box to prove his own certificate?
Obviously, he is not a witness, exempted. I refer to section 293 CRPC that these are the witnesses whose reports will be per se admissible. They need not come to the witness box. Besides them, every witness has to come to the witness box.
So, Lordship, he need not come to the witness box, the person who gives the certificate.
He has to come.
He has to come. He has to come.
He has to come.
Okay, Lordship. Thank you so much.
Exempted is what ma'am was saying.
And there's another very interesting question that has come up, ma'am. This is from Kishore Kumar. Ma'am, he's asking, with the increasing popularity of WhatsApp as a mode of communication, whether an interrupted email capturing the entire chat conversation would be preferable evidence as opposed to a screenshot of chat, because screenshot can be proved using metadata, but an email would require to be proved by a witness from WhatsApp, ma'am.
Just 1 minute. There are multiple questions in this one question, whether it is an email or whether it is a WhatsApp.
Correct.
So these are two different things. WhatsApp does not have a header, whereas email has a header. And as I already clarified, you can't just prove the text of the email without the headers, because that metadata is required to prove your email. But if it is a WhatsApp messages, then you can give the screenshot, but then that will be a secondary sorry, that will be secondary evidence, because you will be giving the paper printout of this these screenshots, right? If you give your evidence, your phone itself, mobile phone, where it is recorded therein, that's primary. Otherwise secondary, then 65B, everything is required.
Shall I? I'll go ahead with the other question. Ma'am.
No, carry on, Kadambari.
Yes, ma'am. Rupinder, you were asking something?
Yeah, Rajesh Hanal has asked that can the judgment of Anwar's case be applied retrospectively?
See, as I said, it has been clarified now in Kundan Singh that you have to give 65B certificate. Now, it said that you have to have that certificate at the time when the computer printout is generated. But it also said that it has to be tendered in evidence. So even if subsequent judgments have clarified, especially Kundan Singh, that even if the certificate is issued subsequently and tendered at the time of evidence, then it's a valid evidence. So there's no question of retrospectively or prospectively. This clarification has been given. But while tendering evidence also, if you don't give the certificate, then it being an inadmissible evidence, you can't. This can't be relied upon.
Right, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Please
Kadambari, over to you.
per se. Rupinder, sorry, ma'am. Ma'am, there is another question by Saurabh Jain. In commercial court cases, whether the affidavit under section 65B can be filed at the time of examination in chief. This is so as there is a prohibition of filing any document under Order 7 Rule 14 in cases of Commercial Court Act, and even permission to file additional documents are to be very strict in terms of Commercial Courts Act.
See, it should be filed. There is a difference between filing and tendering. You may file the document. Your requirement as per the rule is to file the document at that time. But when that witness will appear, he will tender that document. So if you understand the distinction between filing and tendering in evidence, everything is clear. Requirement is all original document certificates as per the commercial code be filed at the time of filing or at best within 30 days with the leave of the court, right? But when you come in the witness box, you will tender it. So if this requirement is there, you have to file it.
Thank you, ma'am.
Prima facie, that document will give a satisfaction. It may still be disproved. It may still be had to be non-reliable to. Now, at the stage in a commercial suit, at the first stage itself, the court may even, based if there is no written statement filed, court may pass a summary judgment. If there is the written statement does not deny the facts properly, then a summary judgment can be passed. There is an admission, it can be passed. So that requirement of filing is a must, and one must understand difference between filing and tendering. See, these are, unless one understands the distinction between various terminologies, it will be always a mess. Most of the people confuse relevancy with admissibility, admissibility with reliability. These are three very different issues. Similarly, filing a document is different from tendering in evidence. These are two different stages. At the first stage, you file. At the second stage, when you come in the witness box, you tender that document and exhibit that document.
Ma'am, thank you so much, ma'am. In fact, I think it would do good for very young lawyers who are just entering the profession, or the students, to have a term, a kind of
right.
the terms and
Yeah.
learn it up. I think for older lawyers also, I guess.
No, this profession is one where we learn every day. Every day we learn.
Thank you so much. And there's another question by Bhupinder Singh. Ma'am, how can one prove a document which is an attachment to an email, while one can give 65B certificate for the email being in the receipt of email? The same cannot be said of the document which is an attachment to the email.
No, but why can't you say that this was an attachment received with the email? I don't find any issue with it. After all, attachment is a part of the email, no? The person receiving will say, I received it with this header, and this was the attachment.
Ma'am, Jayant now is asking, question which was connected to his previous one. Who certifies a mail sent in a conversation to a contract? If a mail is sent through Gmail or Yahoo Mail, which authority needs to certify the printout? So
No, see, it is not the authority giving, because this authority is only a medium. After all, you are taking out the secondary certificate, printout, computer output, so that you will give the certificate that it is from my computer, I received it. The onus is on you to prove. Yahoo or Gmail will not come every time to give you a certificate.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, Vasu Manchanda is asking, how can secondary evidence be obtained from encrypted social media platforms? And how to ensure it is not tampered? Will recording a telephonic conversation by a private player not amount to infringement of privacy under Article 21? Now, these are two different questions.
These are actually 3 or 4 different questions clubbed together.
Shall I read out one by one, ma'am?
So it's the encrypted data. Also, you have to prove the end-to-end encryption therein. These are again an issues of trial, that it is end-to-end encryption. You will have to prove. Now, his second part of the question was, what was the second part of the question?
It says, how can secondary evidence be obtained from encrypted social media platforms, and how to ensure that it is not tampered?
See, that it is tampered with or will mostly be known by forensic analysis. It is not easy for any common man to find out. So that one relies always on the forensic analysis.
Her other part of the question is, will recording a telephonic conversation by a private player not amount to infringement of privacy under Article 21? That's a different...
See, again, we must find the answers are very... See, you must see, supposing if you have violated somebody's privacy, you may have committed an offense, right? But if it is relevant and admissible evidence, it can be taken into consideration.
Thank you, ma'am.
So the test for that evidence will be relevancy, admissibility, and reliability.
Yes. Thank you, ma'am.
You may be infringing somebody's privacy. You will be liable for it. You can be prosecuted for it. But then if it is relevant, it is relevant.
Ma'am, there's a bit lengthy question, but seems to be a bit attractive, ma'am. Ma'am, if you permit me, may I ask a question, ma'am?
Yes.
Ma'am, suppose during investigation, this is from one of the lawyers, ma'am. Suppose during investigation, a mobile device is taken into custody and it is operated by the investigating officer for several hours in 2 or more days, and it is connected to more than one computers and data is drawn out of the same during the time on various occasions by the investigating agency. After doing all this, they send it to the FSL. From the forensic examination and data retrieval, is data obtained from such a device admissible in court, ma'am? Second question, that's again, ma'am, bit related.
See, what I'm feeling with this question, that my entire exercise of telling the distinction between admissibility and reliability is gone to the dog. At the outset said that these are 3 compartments. Once that evidence it may be admissible. It is admissible in evidence. But the fact is it may not be reliable because it has been tampered with. You are not able to assure the accuracy of that data. Having seized that data, having taken into custody, seized by the CISAMIBO and said that it has been sealed, if it is shown that there was access to that hardware, then of course there can be issues about reliability, and that will be depending on facts of each case. Maybe the court may come to the conclusion that yes, they did access it, they did not keep it in custody properly, but by that access, they have not tampered, as is evident from the forensic. They only tried to take a clone image or a mirror image, and actually, since they did not know how to do it, all this happened. So it's an issue of reliability which will depend on the facts of a case. It is not an issue of admissibility.
Correct, ma'am. In fact, on proof of admissibility of document, you had clearly stated this topic and elaborately dealt with it.
Yeah, I gave those examples also at that time.
Absolutely, along with the sections also, ma'am. Could that be another question?
There is another one by Hemant Gupta. Whether any email specifically pleaded in the plaint, if not denied specifically by the defendant in the written statement, still requires certificate under 65B to prove it?
See, now, as we said, when you're filing a plaint, you are filing that email, you're filing your certificate under section 65B. Under the Commercial Codes Act, you are bound to file with it. Written statement will come only within 30 days after the summons. His admission will be later. But the general rule is admission is the best proof. So if a party admits admission, then you have to see what it is admitting, whether it is admitting the receipt of the an email, or whether it is admitting the receipt of the contents of the email as well. What is being admitted?
And accordingly, plan your further.
Yeah, so actually, this has to be all seen in a stage-wise fashion. These are questions which must have arisen, but these questions do not arise alone. They are always with other facts associated with it. Otherwise, the law is admission is the best proof. If other party has admitted, you don't need to prove it. You don't need to prove a document which has been admitted by the other party.
Ma'am, the next question is by Garima Kaur. What if somebody submits a forged copy, or if he makes a fake document? I think this is already also covered, but I leave it to you.
No, fake document that the forensic analysis will tell. The hash value will be different the moment it is changed. I said, I change my name Mukta Gupta dot to Mukta dot Gupta. The hash value will change. So when at the initial time, at the time of seizure, at the time of making the mirror image, at the time of working, you to see that the hash value is the same. So the moment it changes, it can be found out that there's tampering therein.
Ma'am, I just wanted to ask you, there are a number of questions left. Are you okay with taking those? Because
it's okay, I am fine with it. If it satisfies everybody's queries, I am fine with it.
Ma'am, I'll take the next question very fast now. All the questions. Doesn't the compulsion of, this is asked by Divyam, doesn't the compulsion of having a certificate lead to a situation of technicalities overshadowing the principles of justice?
No. In fact, asking for a certificate is a part of justice delivery system for the reason the party wants to rely upon your document. The party wants the court to rely upon its document. So at the preliminary stage, till it is tendered, that certificate assures the court that what has been filed is a genuine till it is disproved. When the time comes, or the other side shows no, there is tampering to this extent. So I don't see that it is not doing away with the requirement of justice. I don't see it.
Thank you so much, ma'am. And in fact, it facilitates.
It facilitates.
Ma'am, another question which has already been answered, but I'll just touch upon it for the benefit of.
No, I'll put it other way around. It is like taking affidavit from a party filing a petition or a plaint or something, because then he is bound by what he has said over there. Tomorrow, if it is found to be incorrect, or it is false or fake, the court can then take action against it.
Ma'am, the next question, which is by Rajesh Arnal. This has been answered, but for the benefit of the audience, I'll just touch upon it. Would the law laid down in PV Anwar apply retrospectively to cases pending prior to the pronouncement of PV Anwar? You've clarified that it was.
Yes, I think I've clarified it number of times.
So I'll skip it. What you had said was it has this PV Anwar was misinterpreted and misapplied in a number of cases.
So Kundan Singh actually clarifies everything. At the time when the evidence is tender, certificate should be there. Otherwise, it's an inadmissible evidence.
Saurabh Jain is asking about the name of the judgment. I think he was referring to Puttu Swami when that matter came up, which is on right to privacy. So you can just type Puttu Swami and you'll find the judgment. The next question is by Hemant Gupta. Whether Gmail can be proved by calling witness of Google company in witness box with records of, this is also answered, with records of email instead of filing 65Bs by certificate. So probably.
Can anybody call?
Ma'am, he can.
Can anybody call? And they must.
Maybe. That there must have been skipping or filing of 65.
So now they want to. Oh.
I'm presuming. Ma'am,
Kadambi, if you permit me,
yes,
ma'am, could you just, ma'am, touch upon, ma'am, on section 340, if it's, ma'am, okay by you with 60 with regard to
340.
Yes, ma'am. With regard
So why? Oh, yes, this is very important. So whosoever gives 65B certificate should be very clear. As I said, that having given the certificate, you state on oath that these things are correct, and in case they are found to be incorrect or false, then action can be taken against you. You can be tried and convicted for perjury. So in fact, you know what I find is, our courts are slow on this count because probably the work pressure is so much. We all feel that why should we get into this further litigation? But if the courts go very strong on 340 CRPC, I'll tell you, number of false and frivolous litigations will come.
Absolutely, ma'am. Absolutely.
In fact, ma'am, this gives also some, a tool to the parties who are in a private dispute also. So if a certificate is wrong and they know that, a party is trying to mislead the court, they can actually take it up, and which a lot of people don't do. We just take 65B as if, it's there.
It's an idle formality.
Yes. So, ma'am.
But then, if that 65B certificate is known by the responsible person, the person who is in charge and all, that will be actually a redundant affidavit.
That is right, ma'am.
So these are all requirements to be met with.
Besides expediting, sometimes if somebody is given a false certificate, so by prosecuting that person, that matter would be likely to be settled faster probably by highlighting the forged or fabricated. Ma'am, another question by Vasu Manchanda. How can secondary evidence be obtained from encrypted social media platforms?
I think I just answered, yeah.
I think he's again reposted that. Okay, another one.
I think these are now more repeat questions coming.
Yes, I think this is also done. Can a person obtain a document from a device that is in somebody else's possession and submit it in the court? So
I think I really explained it very nicely in the form of a scanned document and all that.
Abhishek is asking the next question. If an agreement is executed in presence of a witness and the statement of witness contradicts the handwriting.
I think, Kadambari, this question has been already done. I said it's an issue of reliability.
Yes, ma'am.
Whether to rely the handwriting expert or the witness.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, another one by Rakesh Chittara. Investigating officer takes over someone's smartphone. IO changes the password, which is not known to the accused. In the office of the agency, the data is retrieved by opening the device several days later. is IO committing an error? How better to do it?
No, because all these, as I said, to maintain the accuracy and the legitimacy of the data retrieve, you must take the mirror image and work on it. And you cannot access it. The moment you access it, the forensic analysis will tell it has been accessed. So then that sanctity of evidence will be lost. The reliability will not be there.
Ma'am, the next question is by Kishore. With increasing popularity of WhatsApp as a mode of communication, whether
I think you've already asked this question. These are
again, so I did not read the entire thing. Yes, it is there, ma'am. Not through metadata, which has been already.
yeah. All these are now repeat questions coming up again.
Ma'am, one question, ma'am, if you permit, ma'am. Ma'am, till what stage is the defect of non-filing of section 65B curable, ma'am? Ma'am, another question linked to it is, ma'am, can the court suo moto call upon the party to file it, ma'am?
See, it's again, before you tender evidence, you can file it. If you've not done it, though it should be filed initially, and at the stage of tendering, it should be there with you. Otherwise, it's inadmissible evidence. In a given case, court may just caution you that you have not filed it properly, but the court cannot direct you to file. You lose the evidence, you lose the evidence.
Right, ma'am.
Ma'am, another one.
Court is not there to fill up the gaps, lacunas in your case.
Correct, ma'am.
Ma'am, the next question is, suppose during investigation, a mobile device is taken into custody and it is operated by the investigating officers for several hours and 2 or more days, and it is connected to more than one computers, and the data is drawn out of the same during this time on various occasions by the investigating agency. After doing all this, they send it to FSL for forensic examination and data retrieval. Is data obtained from such a device admissible in court? Does operating the said device before the actual FSL amount to potential tampering so as to hamper the credibility of evidence? Would such retrieval be?
That is why I said, you know, if they retrieve the data by taking computer printouts, then they're accessing to it. That is why what they do is they take a mirror image. They prepare a clone copy, and then on that forensic work is done.
Okay. So
These are all speculative questions. They don't do like this.
right,
They take a mirror image. There's a scientific way of working.
sorry, ma'am. Himanshu Dubey wants to know, ma'am, it is also useful to know because lawyers may presume that,
Yeah.
would arise.
It happens like this.
Ma'am, Himanshu Dubey.
I mean, we can't even rule out an odd one may do it like this, but then you can point out.
Yes, ma'am. The other one is just on a very on a ground which is given already in the Evidence Act. It says whether a photocopy of an email can even be termed as a document as per law without 65B, which is not. That is why the purpose of 65B is there. Go to the next one. Till what stage the primary document, qua the certificate, has been given to be procured?
What is this question?
I think in your evidence, in the evidence which has to be concluded by a party, this has to be what?
No, if it's a primary evidence, it's a primary evidence. You don't need a 65B certificate. You need it only for the...
They are asking till what stage the primary document qua which the certificate has been given to be procured.
To be procured, nahi, to be preserved. That should be the answer. Yes, till the time it is received in evidence. Because even when you lead secondary evidence, in case it is destroyed or lost, then of course you can't produce it. But if it is difficult to produce, in a given case, the court may ask either suo moto, or if the accused shows that there is tampering with the evidence, or the sanctity is breached, the chain of custody is breached, the court may ask for the original record. So that original record should be technically preserved till the evidence is led, so that the court has benefit of seeing this. But as I refer to section 7, which says that if there is a time limit till when the electronic records are required to be maintained, that's sufficient if it is maintained till that.
Ma'am, the next question is intermediaries and operators can record data for security as per guidelines. And that can be used.
No. What is the question?
Question is ambiguous because this is what.
Yeah, it's not a complete question.
Yes, ma'am. So I'll go to the next one, ma'am. My question is that whether a photocopy of an email can even be termed as a I think it's come again. So
Photocopy will not be, computer printout will be.
yes, ma'am.
And how does one take a photocopy of an email?
From the computer.
Can you play a photocopier?
So
No, how do you take a photocopy? By keeping a document inside.
Yes.
So can you place an email? You will place a device in which the email has been received.
Yes.
Can you photocopy through it? So the question is ill-conceived.
Ma'am, Rakesh Chatkara wants to know, common practice by investigating officers is to change the password of the smartphone unknown to the accused, and a few days later.
I think this has already been done, yes. These are all repeat questions coming, I think, Kadambari, we can...
Ma'am, just, I'll just take up only...
If there is something which is there, otherwise then we need...
Ma'am, there's a POSCO-related POXO case. Bail was granted to an accused on the ground of CCTV installed in the accused premises and lack of medical evidence. Can the CCTV in possession of the accused be relied upon?
Why not? I mean, accused can produce evidence in defense. Yes, when the stage, but actually the investigating agency was required to seize this CCTV if it shows that the accused was innocent. But even if the investigating agency has not seized, then the accused would be at liberty to lead a defense evidence for this. And if he leads that, he is at this stage of bail, he is not leading evidence, but he is showing material which is a cogent material to show that he was not an accused, he was not even there. The court can consider it, and based on that grant bail, why not?
Ma'am, all the questions have been addressed.
I think we need
I'm
to...
happy.
Ma'am, thank you so very much.
I just wanted to, Ravinder, I got a message. Actually, there are 5 professors of law who have attended the session, and I want to thank them for gracing this platform. Besides which, the students, there was a little glitch. I think the audio was not very clear in the beginning of the session, ma'am. And I wanted to just tell everybody that we will be circulating because after that, that glitch was also sorted out. I was told that in certain locations it was not being heard. That was rectified, and we can again circulate this recorded copy to everybody. It can be placed again on the YouTube after downloading it, and everybody to access it. Rubinder, up to you.
So ma'am, with this ma'am, thank you so very much for sparing your valuable time, ma'am. It's been one of the best sessions that we have ever had, and on behalf of Lecture Series on Law, ma'am, and the entire team, ma'am, we are obliged, would I say the word, ma'am, and thankful to you, ma'am. The way you have explained, ma'am, in fact, it gets us back to our yesteryears of college and restarting, ma'am, Evidence Act, ma'am. You've been so profound and so intense, ma'am, and the patience you have showed, ma'am, for answering each and every question, ma'am, till the very end. We are, ma'am, very grateful for all this, ma'am, and with a request, ma'am, that we would, ma'am, in the coming days, we'll once again, ma'am, re-invite you for another topic, ma'am, and kindly do grace, ma'am. And with this ending, ma'am, ending note, ma'am, I once again, ma'am, thank on behalf of our entire team and on Lecture Series on Law, ma'am. Thank you so very much, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Kadambari. Thank you, Rubinder. And thank you, everybody, for this patient, for the time they spent on this webinar. I hope it is of some use to everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your patience, ma'am, and clarifying all our doubts. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am.